spirit and the premise of the new map of life. We've been, since we started the Center on Longevity, trying very hard to make it clear that we aren't a center on aging and that a center on longevity is a different thing. But when I first proposed this idea to the then president of Stanford University, John Hennessy, I said a center on longevity, and he kind of said, wink, wink, that's just a euphemism, right? It's a center on aging. And I said, it's truly not a center on aging. We have as many pediatricians interested in this, as many educators interested in this, as we have geriatricians, as we have gerontologists. This is about all of life. And so, I've kind of convinced him, but I feel like a lot of what we've been doing through the years of the Longevity Center is trying to change this narrative from one about old age to one about long life. It's an important shift to make in how we think about life, because if we're thinking only about old age, we make a very big mistake to think that the outcomes that we live in old age are independent from the way we lived our lives from the time we were born. In fact, you said from birth is when this starts. One of my colleagues commented to me when I said exactly that, oh, it starts prenatally. This is not, and the more we learn about genetics, it might start a couple generations before we're conceived. So we're learning a lot about this. But the idea is that adding 30 extra years to life is an extraordinary gift of time. Our ancestors gave us this gift, no strings attached, longer lives, more time to chase our dreams, to realize our goals, to spend with our loved ones. That's the gift. What did we do with it? We did the most unimaginative thing possible. We tacked all the 30 extra years on at the end, and we said, oh my gosh, this is terrible. How are we going to support all these old people? What if everybody leaves the workforce? How do we live with so much drag on the economy and on families and on communities? This is disastrous. And we got engaged in trying to bolster the frail old folks that we imagined. Now, the more we learned about aging, by the way, the more we learned that a whole slew of older people are doing just fine. I was having a conversation with my dad around a kitchen table maybe 10 years ago, and I remember him saying, Laura, we have to stop talking only about how to save the old folks and get them to save us all. That's always stayed in my mind. Now, he was 95 at the time, and they were the elderly. We push away from they. So these centers on aging that most universities have focus on really important issues. They focus on frailty. They focus on dementia. They focus on caregiving. And I cannot stress how much I believe those are important areas of life that we need to address. But that isn't the Center on Longevity. So the Center on Longevity is a center about reconsidering those 30 years and developing new models of life, investing in legal science, and changing cultural scripts so that longer lives improve quality of life at all ages. That is what we believe is the aim of the new map of life, and really should be the aim for a reconsideration of longevity. We want to create a new model of life where at all stages, from early childhood to very late life, people can achieve a sense of purpose, belonging, and worth. And we believe that this 3-stage model of life that has really been the model that's guided us up until now, it doesn't work. It doesn't work for individuals, and it doesn't work for societies. And so we really need to rethink it. When we started the center, we established 3 research domains within it to focus on our work. One was on mobility, which was physical fitness. One was on financial security. And another was, we called the mind, and that would include emotional well-being and cognitive functioning, engagement. And we were doing our work within these domains, and what it dawned on us, it takes me a long time for things to get through, I guess, but every time we worked on a project in one of those domains, we needed to draw on the other domains. We started to see that everything was connected. And we can't change one aspect of the way we live without changing others. We can't expect people to work forever, which is probably a good thing to some degree. But we can't do that if we're going to end education in our early 20s. We can't expect people to be engaged and productive members of communities if they're not healthy, if they can't make it out of the house physically. So we need to change these aspects. We need to change all of life, and we need to do it pretty much at the same time. And so in a way, this is overly complicated, and I would be the first to say it, but I also deeply believe that it's the only way to achieve what we need to achieve in crafting a new model. So I'm gonna stop blathering on, because I'm starting to feel like that professor that Chip described, the one that can just, and I can do that, by the way, I can fill that role.
Now, let me start asking you some questions, because this is good stuff. Thank you to both of you. So Laura, give us 3 or 4 tangible recommendations that have come from publishing the report. What needs to change? How are we structurally unprepared as a society? And then I'll have a question that's more on the personal side after that. Go ahead.
The one that I think in some ways is the most important is to recognize that age diversity is a net positive. We are so concerned about aging societies that we're overlooking the opportunity that we now have for the first time in human history. And that is a relatively even distribution of age in the population. We have always lived, up until now, embedded in human populations where there were a lot of young people and very few old people. And to be brutally honest and blunt, it didn't really matter what older people were like when 4% of the population was over 65. And that was only 1900. Prior to that time, people did reach old age, but it was rare. It was not something that happened en masse. And that's what's happening today. The reason I say this is so important is because it does change the conversation. And that's maybe the most important aspect of the new map of life, is to begin to think differently about what the era in life that we're living through, where we are right now. And that's because if we don't, we're going to just sort of sleepwalk through the possibilities that we have in front of us. So what I like to think about age diversity, for example, a concrete example is, imagine a world, by the way we live in it, where we have available to us the strengths of young people, the speed, the agility, the ambition, the motivation to individually achieve. These are wonderful characteristics, and we see it in young people widely. Now you combine those characteristics with the characteristics of another part of that population that is experienced, that is motivated to improve the broader world, that is more pro-social. A group of people who are emotionally stable and invested in younger people. You put all that together and you start to think what kind of societal challenges we can address together. And that's what's magnificent. As I say, we've never had it before, and we're sleepwalking through it, talking about things like intergenerational conflict and how we can't have generations together. Of course we can. We already know in the workforce, for example, that mixed age teams in most workplaces that have been studied are more productive than same age teams, whether they're all old or all young. It's this interaction that we have before us, and we need to understand that it's there, or we're going to try to cope with it as opposed to, frankly, exploit it. It's a great opportunity, and we need to see it.
So let me ask another question, then I'll let Barb ask a question. On a personal level, so that's sort of a societal frame. Now let's take it to a personal frame. If we're going to be living longer, what are 2 or 3 tips you would give to the people who are watching today, and to live a life that's maybe as deep and meaningful as it is long, so that the quality is as maybe as good as the quantity?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one of the things is to not wait for society to change its culture, and rather be part of the culture change. And people often ask me, what are the policies that could change things for people? And they're not going to come. So don't wait for the federal government to tell us how to do this. The changes are going to come from individuals who are living their lives differently. So that's the first thing I would say is don't let
They're both laying there.
social scripts come to guide us today. People often look backwards to their parents, to their grandparents, to think about how they live their lives.
Ted is like, wow.
And what we really need to do is to say, how are we going to live our lives today, given what we have, given the resources? So that's one. One is don't ever stop working as long as you're able. And that doesn't have to be paid work, and it doesn't have to be full-time work. I think Americans work really badly. That is, we put way too much time into work in the middle of life. So much so that a lot of people can't wait to retire because they just need a break. But they don't need such a stark break. And a lot of people realize that after they retire. So we don't have that many models for flexible retirement. I argue that people should retire frequently throughout their lives and then come back into the workforce. So take breaks, come in and out, but always think about what you're going to do and how you're going to live your life with a sense of purpose and worth. And that usually means contributing to others. Again, it doesn't matter if it's paid or unpaid. If you have the luxury of doing this unpaid, great. It gives you even more flexibility. Another one is to think about the skills that you're going to need to contribute to the kinds of issues that you care most about. I like to even think about the modern version of careers. This is what I advise young students at Stanford is when you're during your paid life, work life, acquire the kinds of skills and contacts and opportunities that you'll need when you don't have to engage in paid work as much, and now you can give it away, but you want to do that with experience and knowledge about the areas that you care most about. So if people begin to live their lives preparing for the next stage, as opposed to preparing to quit, which is the old model, then we begin to live better, higher quality lives. So we want to interweave education and work and leisure all the way through. Not parse it into these starkly divided areas.
Got it. Beautiful. Thank you. I'm going to pass it on to Barb in a second, but let me just, I love this image because, and I've talked about it at the Modern Elder Academy in Baja quite a bit. Mary Catherine Bateson calls it the midlife atrium. She said the way we tend to think of aging is with the additional years, we've just added a couple bedrooms in the backyard, as if it's sort of added to the end of your life and it's in the backyard. And really what is needed is a structural change such that you have a midlife atrium, because for most of us, the extra years are really added to the middle of your life when you have in fact, midlife may have actually grown as a result of that in terms of, how many years constitute midlife. And any atrium provides light and reflection and the space for people to imagine other paths. And I think, you've really spoken to that. Barb, I'm going to let you ask a question.
Sure.
Or make an observation.
I want to pick up on a few of the super important things that both of you have said. So the work that I do in the world to bring this discussion right to bear and to help create change is through executive coaching and transition coaching in people's lives. And I consider everyone on this call, we're all leaders, whether you're leading your life, you're leading your family, you're leading a community, a movement, a company. And leadership is an inside job. It starts from the inside out. So Laura, what you were just saying about it starts at the individual level. Let's not wait until politicians make the changes, until it bubbles up. Let's all recognize the power and potential that we have to, as Gandhi said, be that change we want to see in the world, and it starts with us. So that idea of leadership being an inside job,
what they really think.
Important. And I think one of the beauties of the work coming out of the Center on Longevity, the new map of life is enabling people to see the different avenues to take personally. And that leads into another important point that you both brought up, which is it's time to retire retirement. It's not so much we retire so many times during our lives, because to retire means to withdraw. It's transitions. And Laura, here's where I get into a question for you. There's a part of the report that talks about life transitions are a feature, not a bug. And I'm guessing that many of the people here with us today have some sort of transition that they're facing. So can you talk a little bit about what that means?
Yes. And yes, of course, we're talking to a whole group of people today, or we're talking with a whole group of people who are the transitioners, who are the leaders of this kind of new cultural change. And the Modern Elder Academy is a force in this world for that kind of change. Exactly. So thank you, Chip, and your colleagues for all the work you're doing in this. If we're going to live for 100 years, there are very few of us who are going to be able to do that in a linear fashion, even if that's what we chose to do. Things happen in life. We get tired of a job that we have. We have children, and for a while, our lives are just totally, sort of built around those young ones. And in the old models, because people didn't live very long, we didn't think much about the empty nest stage in life, which, by the way, is a terrifically satisfying time in life. I could come back to that later, but it's a myth, this empty nest syndrome as being a problem for people. But it is a stage now. It's a typical normative stage that we live many, many years past the years where we're raising kids at home. And as much as that can feel like that's going to go on forever, it doesn't go on forever. And so we need to think about that transition as the children leave. What do we want to do next? And then you need to think about the transition when those grandchildren grow up and go to college and they don't need you quite as much. Lives have really stretched out so much that novel transitions will become part of it. We'll also see unexpected and unwelcome changes like widowhood, the divorce, an ending of important relationships. This is going to happen in a century. To most of us, something's going to happen. So we need to be able to think about our lives and plan for our lives as having a structure, having a goal, having your eye on some ball, but also recognizing that things can change, and we need to be ready for that change as well. That means learning, that means being open to new experiences and new change and new opportunities.
And I think there's a place for what heretofore we've called gap experiences, gap years, and we think about it for younger people.
Yes.
Some of these, I don't know if we want to think about them as placeholder times or figuring it out times, are gaps that we now, looking towards a century-long life, are able to figure out. Doesn't mean you need money to do it. I took a gap year. I was still employed part-time. You can rent out your home. There are all kinds of interesting ways, especially utilizing technology in ways that work for us, not against us, to use these times. MEA is a great example. I mean, we're leading a 5-day immersive in getting away, being in nature, which opens up our pathways in so many ways, to take this gap and take a time, as I call it, a time in, to figure out what's next. So I also think, and the new map of life talks about or refers to this in this life transitions are a feature, not a bug. Everyone can think about, it's okay now to take a space, a little more spaciousness to figure out what's next, because my life is multiple chapters and I want to be the author rather than letting someone else write it for me, which happens if we don't do it ourselves.
Right. I do think we need to have new financial products. I talk to a lot of people in the financial services industry, and I really think we need to prepare differently for longer lives. We need financial products that are like 529 plans, but for ourselves, so that we can save from early in life for times where we might step out of the workforce, either to retrain in some new skill to go in a different direction, or just to rest. But it's really, really hard to do that for most people financially. But if we had new models and ways of thinking of it, and we started really early in life, the one thing nice about financial preparedness and long life is compounding interest. So we need to think about things like starting birth accounts, where it's really aimed at change in your life. So you can have a transitions account. We don't need to save a larger and larger pot of gold at the end of life if we're not going to retire in the way that we used to. The vast majority of people can't save enough in a 40-year working life to retire for 30 years, nor can the governments in the countries in which they live. So, but again, this new model makes it work. But I do think we need to be thoughtful about it and plan for it so that we can make sure that this can happen, not just for affluent people, but for everybody in the population.
Yes, very important. I think, Barbara, do you want to say something?
This past week or last Sunday, there was an article in the New York Times, The Solution to Poverty, Invest in Kids. And it talked about the benefits of social safety net programs can be seen generations later. So that gets back to what was mind-blowing for me. Longevity begins at birth, maybe before, and thinking through what are the gender imbalances and differences that are so unfair, the racial, the socioeconomic, the educational, and how can we start earlier to build systems like, instead of a 529 just for education, have it for a number of different purposes that will help people through transitions in their life. I think the new Map of Life does a great job of putting these ideas out there. And then part of our jobs is to share it with all of you and get your ideas about how to activate it in your lives and then pay it forward. And that's how real change happens. So it's really important.
So, and to that idea, in about 3 or 4 minutes, we're going to open it up. So if you would like to ask a question to Laura or Barb or me, go ahead and go down to the reactions section down below and raise your hand, and we'll call on you in a couple minutes. That's the better way to do it than put something in the chat. If we don't have enough hands up, then we'll go to the chat, and Carrie will keep track of that. But mostly it'll be people who will call on. And so far I see, is that, yeah, we got.
Can I jump in 1 second before you go to
Please.
question?
Please.
I just want to speak to Barbara's really good point here. We need to bring everybody along, and these longer lives and these new models need to be available to deeply in the population, to women, to men, to people who are born into affluence and people who aren't. Again, one of these transitional periods. So we need to be able to do that and make it available to all. And if we don't, we're sunk, frankly, because if the top 9% just flourishes as we grow older, and the rest of the population doesn't, we lose the great scientists, the creators, the entrepreneurs, the people who could have participated but now can't. That's, to me, in some ways, the lack of opportunities for all is the issue in longevity. And so I see longevity in some ways as the context in which we can start new conversations about gender and race and poverty, because it's within this context and within the societal framework that we all have a stake in it, and we have new opportunities to address it. So that I wanted to make that one last little soapbox pitch. Thanks.
That's great. No, I love it. So we're going to start with Andrew, and if you can make sure you're not muted, and join us on stage, Andrew. And please keep your questions brief. That means no more than about 3 sentences, if possible. We have a lot of people with their hands up. Thank you, Andrew.
All right. So here's my 3 sentences. Thank you so much for hosting this. So I love this Map of Life. I actually have a executive fellowship with LA County Aging Services, and I've been using this Map of Life to bring in some of our non-government stakeholders into PALA, which is the Purposeful Aging Los Angeles Initiative. Second sentence.
Those are long sentences, Andrew. Come on. Who taught you your punctuation?
You self-taught here. So what I've been using it is, I've specifically been using this at outreach for community colleges. I have 5 community colleges that I'm being project manager to get them age-friendly designated institutions in the next couple of months. My question is, do you have any specific insights or strategies about how to use this Map of Life specifically to engage the young or the older adults? Because that's why we're going for community colleges. For me, it's an obvious, easy target, intergenerational community stakeholder in age-friendly work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thanks for sharing the new Map of Life with the community college system. I have to say that community colleges are so far ahead of universities like Stanford and Harvard and Yale and so on. I mean, because they've been serving working people for a long time, and they've been serving a broader age range for a long time. I think where we need to go with education is to make real skills available to people. Our education system has largely been about teaching people access to a broad core set of knowledge. That's certainly what the university system does. That's a liberal arts education. And that's failing a whole lot of people. What we need to do is to be able to talk to people, first of all, find out when they're in mid-management at a restaurant, what do they need to do to become management? How do they launch something on their own? So I think we need to become more sensitive and more informed about the kinds of skills people need to make the transitions they want.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Andrew. Let's go to Arthur. Let's unmute yourself, Arthur, and there you go. You're going to join us on stage.
Hey there, thank you so much for bringing me up here. I'll try and keep this brief. My industry is advertising, and as we've all discussed in the past, our culture is so youth-oriented, and I think advertising is certainly one of the worst offenders there. It's gotten to a point in advertising now where people, when they get to 40, are considered old. You go into an advertising agency, you rarely see people who are under 40, and under 50, it's unheard of. And it's it comes down to an ageism issue. Now, I appreciate the things you said before about, we are all in charge of, what we do. And this is a message that I give to people as well. We have to create ourselves. We have to become this. We can't wait for the government to do something about it.
And what's your question, Arthur?
Yes, I was getting to it just when you said that. So my question is, how do we deal with ageism, especially as older adults? I'd love your perspective on that.
First of all, let me just say, I think advertising is probably the answer. So it's a problem, but it's also the answer. So we really need you in this, and we need people who think like you in the mix of advertising. So we have new images of aging. Until we change the image, the representation in our minds, it's going to be really hard to get most people to strive to do well during that stage in life. It's like if old age is we're depressed and we're lonely and we're poor and we're excluded, then nobody's going to prepare well for it, and then it's this vicious cycle. So I'm just with you on that. I think having new images of aging and also intergenerational connections, that's where I would say our good friend, and many of you know him, and colleague Mark Friedman likes to say, we have to stop trying to stay young and instead be there for those who actually are. And I think to the extent that we can be leaders and advocates for young people, it starts to break up that generational, the generational silos, and lets younger people see how important we are for their benefit. So that's where I would start.
I would add, thank you, Laura. Arthur, I would add the following. I wrote a book called Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder. And
I've read it.
Great. Chapter 9 in that book is written for CEOs and HR leaders. And it has 10 different specifics that I think every organization should be considering as they're looking at how to create a more age-diverse workforce. So there are some good nuggets in there. And there are a lot of companies that have now taken some of those 10 and done something with them. So I'm wishing you all the best. Are you familiar with David Harry Stewart, an ageist?
I know ageist. Yeah.
Check it. This is one of his big things he talks about as well. So I would stay in touch with him as well. Barbara, anything you want to add?
One quick comment. When I hear that question, I hear something also very personal. You're not just asking about the field of advertising. You're saying, I'm one of these people. What do I do?
Correct. Yeah.
And I've coached CEOs of advertising agencies and people who are trying to figure it out. You are the product. You're the product, and you know whom you're selling to. They may not have as much insight into the ageist tendencies they have as you do. So start thinking about yourself as the product, even though you're trying to get more reality out there about how we look as we get older. And use your skills. Don't be afraid, take risk, use your skills, see yourself as the product. Number two, really quickly, is Stanford Center on Longevity just had a 3-day summit. It was excellent. It was a virtual summit. And there was a short piece where was it, Laura, Norman Lear? And I think it was his grandson or
Oh, just his friend. A good friend. Yeah,
who was maybe between 12, 13 years old,
14, yeah.
14, experiencing their dialogue was tremendously impactful to me. So also focusing in that world of bringing generations together rather than, again, looking at how do we present old people, how do we present young people, trying to see transitions as a feature, not a bug, and look at the beauty in age diversity. So those are the two tips.
Great. We're going to go to Pat in Maine, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. Thank you, Chip. Laura, I have two questions for you. One is that I have been told that in 2022, that you will have some fellows that are focused on the map of life, but looking at the engineering phase as it's been described to me. So I wondered if you might be able to comment at all of what might that mean and what might we be, seeing out of that. The second one is that I am proposing to lead a team of people that is part of the Purpose Exchange to look at the map of life. And I'm also a very active MEA member and part of the New England chapter. So any ideas you might have for us on that? And I just wanted to put a plug in there in case anybody wanted to get in touch with me about being on my team. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to say, Pat, thank you. And Pat is not a plant. We have not met before. So thank you for that question about the next phase of the new map of life. And it is the engineering phase, first of all. So what we feel like we've accomplished with this new map of life, which reflects 3 years of work, by the way, and 9 postdoctoral fellows who became associated with the center and helped, sort of really researched all of the information we needed to produce this new map of life. It's empirically based. And after this second meeting that we just had in November, what we did was to charge all the people there who came to this meeting, many of whom had been at the first meeting that launched the new Map of Life initiative. And we said, okay, here's the report. We've done the analysis. Now let's start the engineering phase. So the issue now is how do we make these changes broadly in the culture? And that's in some ways it means we need a new scientific discovery or we need a new technology. But a lot of these impact fellows will be working with organizations like yours, like CHIPS, we'll be actually getting involved outside of academics in industry, nonprofits, community centers to evaluate and help to begin to identify how we make the change. I think we're at the toughest time in history right now. That is, we had this analysis done. We know the kinds of things that need to change. But it's really, and we know what they will change. We know 100 years from now that people aren't going to be living the way we live today. But it's really hard to know what the first step is. And so we're going to start, we recognize that, and the impact fellows are going to start with modest but achievable goals to begin to start to chip away, no pun intended, at the kinds of change that we need. So impact fellows we're appointing right now, and that is the next phase of the program. We'd love anybody who's interested either in supporting one or in placing one, please get in touch with the Center on Longevity.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Pat. Let's go to Mebs in Toronto, if I'm not mistaken.
Hello. Picking up on Patricia's point, and Laura, you've kind of started talking about it. One of the frustrating things I find with What's Next initiative is that we have all these facts and figures. There are cases being made. The UK has been leading on some really creative innovations. Yeah. And yet the world out there is tone deaf. Look at the employers or the corporate world. And I know through the ARP and the World Economic Forum and OECD, there's an initiative with 50 employers how do we get this momentum going and on a global scale? Because there's some great learnings from Japan, from even Africa.
Mhm.
Yes. Yeah, I think many African countries have in some ways an advantage because they don't have a deeply and embedded culture right now about long life. And so they can benefit from the knowledge and the mistakes we've made in other countries around the world as they build their own and make it perfect. I think I agree with you, first of all, but I think what has to happen is just what we're doing. There are employers who are beginning to recognize that mixed age teams are more productive than young or old teams. That kind of knowledge is incredibly important. There are employers who are finding that allowing flexible work hours for people and flexible glide paths out of full-time work help them retain the talent they deeply need right now during the great resignation, right? So in some ways, we can use this particular era where everything broke because of COVID to say, we don't have to go back exactly the way we did it before. We can do things differently. And people are more open to that now, I think, than they were before COVID. So I think we just start, and it feels slow, but humans are creatures of culture. We tend to do what other people do, but the same problem in getting started works in our favor once we get started because we're like lemmings. Once we see that companies are making those changes, once CEOs see other people are doing it, they're going to go too. Once individuals say they're going to come in and out of work, other people will go too. So I think in some ways we just keep pushing what feels small until one day we wake up and people are saying, well, yeah, but we knew that all along, right?
Mm,
And I will say it's on their radars. So I'm working with HROs, the chief HR operators.
Yeah,
Come-
it's starting.
It may not be happening yet, but as Laura said, it's now out there and it's being considered.
Yep,
So it's on the table.
perfect. Thank you.